Helen Obiora tugged at the strap of her suitcase as she stepped out of Incheon Airport. The crisp evening air was different from the warmth of Lagos, but it carried a promise of something new. She adjusted her coat, pulling out her phone to recheck the address of her new apartment. "This is it, Helen. Your new life begins here." Her heart pounded with excitement and nerves. South Korea, so far from home, from familiarity. Yet here she was, standing at the start of something she had worked tirelessly for. After a long cab ride through the bustling streets of Seoul, she arrived at her apartment complex. A mix of relief and exhaustion washed over her as she struggled with the door code. Just then a voice called out, "You must be the new tenant." Helen turned to see a petite young woman, her dark hair in a messy bun, wearing casual sweats. She grinned brightly, waving. "I'm Jae, your neighbor. Need help?" Helen exhaled. "A friendly face already?" "Yes, please. This door won't budge." Jae giggled. "They can be tricky." She punched in the code swiftly, and the door clicked open. "Welcome to the building," Jae said cheerfully. "You must be exhausted." "I am," Helen admitted. "It's been a long trip." "Well, I make amazing instant ramen. Want some company while you settle in?" Helen hesitated, but then smiled. "I'd like that." The next morning, Helen stood before the towering glass building of Seoul Group International. She took a deep breath, steeling herself before stepping inside. The lobby was grand, polished marble floors, pristine black furniture, and employees dressed in impeccable suits. The air hummed with efficiency, conversations in fast-paced Korean floating around her. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Hello. You must be Helen Obiora." Helen turned to see a tall man in a sleek suit, his brown eyes warm yet assessing. He extended a hand. "I'm Min Young, secretary to Director Kong. Welcome to Seoul Group." Helen shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. Nice to meet you, Min Young." "Come, I'll show you around before you meet Director Kong," he said, leading her down the hallways. "Everyone here works hard, but don't let that intimidate you. Just focus on doing your best." As they walked past glass-walled meeting rooms and structured workstations, Helen absorbed everything. The precision, the hierarchy, the respectful bows exchanged between colleagues. This was a world unlike any she had known. Min Young led her to an office with frosted glass doors. He knocked once before opening it. Inside, a man sat behind a grand mahogany desk, reviewing documents with sharp focus. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, his jet-black hair styled with precision. His presence commanded attention, and Helen felt her breath hitch slightly. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Miss Helen Obiora?" His deep voice carried authority but was polite. "Yes, sir," she replied, stepping forward. "Welcome to the company. I trust your flight was comfortable." "It was." "Thank you," she answered, keeping her posture professional. Ji-hoon nodded, standing. He was taller than she expected. "Min Young will guide you through your responsibilities. I expect diligence and professionalism. Any questions?" Helen shook her head. "Not yet, sir." "Good. Then let's get to work." With that, her journey at Seoul Group officially began. Helen's first week at Seoul Group International was nothing short of intense. The corporate world in Korea was far more structured than what she was used to. Every task was carried out with precision, and expectations were sky-high. Though she had researched Korean work culture before moving, experiencing it firsthand was different. Hierarchy mattered, and as the newest employee, she had to earn respect. But amidst the challenges, there were two constants, Min Young and Kang Ji-hoon. Min Young, her direct colleague and the director's secretary, was warm and approachable. He always had an easy smile, making her feel comfortable. Whenever she struggled with a task, he would slide over to her desk, whispering helpful tips. Ji-hoon, on the other hand, was a different story. He was reserved, professional, and exuded authority. He rarely spoke more than necessary, but his presence alone was enough to keep the entire department on edge. Helen had just finished organizing some documents when a firm voice called out from behind. "Miss Helen." She turned quickly to see Ji-hoon standing by her desk, holding a file. His sharp gaze studied her. This report is incomplete. I asked for a financial breakdown, not just a summary. Helen swallowed. I'm sorry, Director Kong. I'll fix it immediately. Ji-hoon's expression remained unreadable. Do not rush. Accuracy is more important than speed. Deliver it properly this time. She nodded quickly, feeling the weight of his words. As he walked away, Min-young leaned in with a smirk. Don't let him scare you. He's always like that. Helen sighed. I just don't want to mess up. You won't. Just be thorough, Min-young reassured her, his voice soft. He respects hard work. Helen couldn't tell if that was comforting or not. A few nights later, Helen found herself staying overtime to complete a presentation. The office was eerily quiet, save for the sound of her keyboard. Min-young, still at his desk, stretched with a groan. Why are we working this late again? Helen chuckled. Because our boss is a perfectionist. True, Min-young admitted, then grinned. Let's grab coffee. You look like you need it. They walked to the break room, where Min-young leaned casually against the counter as the coffee machine hummed. So, he said, looking at her. How are you adjusting to Korea? Helen hesitated before answering. It's different. But I like it. I'm learning. You're doing great, you know. I've never seen Ji-hoon trust a new hire this quickly. Helen scoffed. You call that trust? He barely looks at me. Min-young chuckled. That's just how he is. But if he didn't think you were capable, he wouldn't waste his time correcting you. Helen considered that. Maybe Ji-hoon wasn't as cold as he seemed. Just as she took a sip of coffee, a voice interrupted them. Miss Helen. She turned abruptly to see Ji-hoon standing by the doorway. Come to my office. Now. Min-young shot her a knowing glance as if to say, Told you he notices you. Her heart pounded as she followed Ji-hoon into his office. Ji-hoon's office was dimly lit, the glow of his desk lamp casting shadows on his sharp features. He placed a document in front of her. Explain this error to me. Helen leaned in, scanning the file. Oh, I see it. I must have overlooked the calculation formula. Ji-hoon sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mistakes like this cost the company time and money. Be more careful. She nodded quickly. I understand. I'll correct it right away. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, his tone softened. You've been working late a lot. Helen blinked. Yes, sir. I want to get things right. Ji-hoon studied her before nodding. Go home after this. Overworking leads to more mistakes. Helen wasn't sure if it was concern or just professional advice, but either way, her chest felt strangely warm. Yes, Director Kong. Back at her desk, Min-young raised an eyebrow. Survived? Helen exhaled. Barely. Min-young chuckled. You're interesting, Helen. No wonder Ji-hoon pays attention to you. Helen didn't know what to say to that. But as she packed up for the night, she realized something. She was thinking about Ji-hoon more than she probably should. And she wasn't sure how she felt about that. Helen had been in Korea for a month now, and though she had adjusted to some aspects of her new life, the cultural differences still challenged her. The language barrier, the formal work environment, and the subtle yet strict hierarchy made every day a learning experience. But what unsettled her the most wasn't the cultural shifts, it was the two men in her life. Min-young was her first friend in the office, warm and playful, always knowing how to make her laugh. Then there was Ji-hoon, strict, reserved, yet impossibly intriguing. Helen found herself drawn to both of them in different ways. And that was dangerous. One evening, Helen was at her desk, stretching her aching fingers after typing up reports all day. Min-young plopped onto the chair beside her desk, sighing dramatically. Another day, another set of files. We should get medals for this. Helen chuckled. Tell that to Director Kong. He'd probably hand us more work instead. Min-young smirked. True. But seriously, you're adjusting well. Even Ji-hoon is starting to soften toward you. Helen raised an eyebrow. You think so? He still gives me that unreadable stare half the time. Min-young leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. That's because he's watching you closely. He only does that when someone catches his interest. Helen rolled her eyes. Well, I'd rather catch his approval, not his interest. Min-young chuckled, but there was something different in his gaze, an intensity she hadn't noticed before. Are you free after work? Let's grab some food. Helen hesitated. It wasn't unusual for colleagues to go out together, but something in Min-young's tone made her pulse quicken. Sure, she finally said. That night, they went to a cozy Korean barbecue restaurant. Min-young showed her how to properly grill the meat, teasing her whenever she got it wrong. You're learning, Helen. Soon, you'll be more Korean than me. She laughed, shaking her head. Highly doubtful. But as they ate, Helen felt a shift between them, an unspoken connection. When Min-young reached over to brush a stray grain of rice from her cheek, her breath caught. It was the first time she wondered if their friendship was turning into something more. The next day at work, Helen was reviewing reports when Ji-hoon's voice startled her. Miss Helen, my office. She grabbed her notepad and followed him, her heartbeat oddly fast. Inside, Ji-hoon sat across from her, his sharp gaze studying her before he finally spoke. You've improved. Your reports are more detailed now. Helen blinked. Was that a compliment? Thank you, sir. I'm trying my best. Ji-hoon nodded, tapping a pen against the desk. Then, after a pause, he added, Min-young seems to enjoy your company. Helen's eyes widened slightly. Was he commenting on Min-young? He's been very helpful, she said carefully. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but she swore she saw a flicker of something unreadable. Good. Just remember, workplace relationships can be complicated. Helen wasn't sure what he meant by that, but the conversation left her unsettled. Did Ji-hoon care about her interactions with Min-young? Or was this just his way of warning her? That night, Helen sat in her apartment, deep in thought. She was confused. Min-young was easy to be around, playful, charming. Ji-hoon was the opposite. Intense, serious, yet undeniably captivating. Sighing, she turned to her neighbor, Ji, who was sitting cross-legged on her couch, eating tteokbokki. Spill it, Helen. Something's bothering you. Helen hesitated before finally admitting. It's about two men. Jiae's eyes widened in excitement. Two? Oh, this just got interesting. Helen groaned, burying her face in a pillow. It's not funny. One is my boss. The other is his secretary. Jie gasped dramatically. Office romance? This is straight out of a drama. Jie, focus. Her friend grinned. Okay. So, which one do you like? Helen sighed. That's the problem. I don't know. Min-young is kind, makes me laugh, and I feel comfortable with him. But Ji-hoon, there's something about him. He challenges me. And sometimes I think he sees me, not just an employee. Ji nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like Min-young is safe, but Ji-hoon excites you. Helen frowned. So, what do I do? Ji smirked. Date both and see who lasts. Helen groaned again. You're no help. Ji chuckled. Fine. Here's my real advice. Pay attention to how they make you feel. Not just in fun moments, but in the quiet ones. Who makes you feel safe? Who makes you feel seen? Helen thought about that long after Ji left. And she realized she had to be careful. Because feelings, once acknowledged, were hard to ignore. Helen thought she had time to figure things out. She had hoped that if she ignored the way her heart skipped whenever Ji-hoon looked at her, or the warmth she felt when Min-young teased her, her emotions would settle. She was wrong. Things were only getting more complicated. It was another late night at the office. Helen sat at her desk, the only sound in the room being the quiet clicking of her keyboard. Most employees had gone home, but she had stayed behind to finish a report that was due the next morning. Min-young, as usual, was still there too. You know, he said, leaning against her desk with a playful smirk, you're going to burn yourself out if you keep working this hard. Helen sighed. Says the man who's still here. But I have an excuse. It's my job to stay late sometimes. You, on the other hand, are just too diligent. Helen shook her head, but she smiled. Min-young always had a way of making her feel lighter, even after a long day. How about this? Take a break. 5 minutes. I'll make us coffee. She hesitated, but when Min-young pulled her up from her chair, she laughed. They went to the office kitchenette, and as he prepared the coffee, she leaned against the counter, watching him. There was something about Min-young, he made everything look easy. Even making coffee felt like an effortless charm. "Here you go," he said, handing her a cup. Their fingers brushed, lingering for a second too long. Helen swallowed. The air between them shifted. Min-young stepped closer, just enough that she could feel his warmth. "Helen," he said softly, "you know I like you, right?" Helen's heart pounded. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a voice cut through the air. "Min-young, Helen. Am I interrupting?" They both turned sharply. Ji-hoon stood at the entrance of the kitchenette, his sharp gaze locked on them. Helen stepped back immediately, her face flushing. Min-young, on the other hand, smirked. "Not at all, Director Kong. We were just taking a break." Ji-hoon's eyes flickered between them before settling on Helen. "A word with you. Now." Helen followed Ji-hoon into his office, her nerves on edge. He closed the door behind her and turned, arms crossed. "Are you involved with Min-young?" Helen's mouth went dry. "No. We're just friends." Ji-hoon studied her for a long moment. Then he exhaled, rubbing his temples. "Helen, I don't interfere in my employees' personal lives. But office relationships, they're risky. And Min-young, he's not always serious about things. I don't want you to get hurt." Helen frowned. "Why do you care?" Ji-hoon looked at her, his gaze unreadable. Then he simply said, "Because I do." Helen's breath caught. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ji-hoon stepped back. His professional mask returned. "That's all. Get some rest." Helen left, but the pounding of her heart didn't stop. Why did Ji-hoon's words feel like more than just a warning? A few days later, Min-young asked Helen to dinner again. This time, she hesitated. Ji-hoon's words lingered in her mind. But when Min-young grinned at her, so effortlessly charming, she found herself saying yes. They went to a quiet restaurant, tucked away in a small alley. The atmosphere was warm, intimate. "So," Min-young said, taking a sip of his drink, "did Ji-hoon say anything to you after that night?" Helen nearly choked on her food. "What?" Min-young smirked. "I know Ji-hoon, Helen. He's not the type to just let things slide. He must have said something." Helen hesitated. "He warned me about office relationships." Min-young chuckled. "Of course he did. Ji-hoon follows the rules. But you know what I think? He's just jealous." Helen blinked. "Jealous?" Min-young leaned in, resting his chin on his hand. "You're different, Helen. And Ji-hoon notices. He doesn't like seeing you close with someone else." Helen shook her head. "That's ridiculous. He's my boss." "He doesn't." Min-young raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Helen didn't answer, because she wasn't sure anymore. That weekend, Helen received an unexpected text. "Ji-hoon, are you free tonight?" She stared at her phone, her heart pounding. Why was Ji-hoon asking her that? She hesitated before replying. "Helen, yes, why?" "Ji-hoon, come over. I want to talk." Helen swallowed. This wasn't normal. But she found herself getting ready anyway. Helen stood outside Ji-hoon's apartment, her heart hammering in her chest. She had never been here before. His messages had been brief, just an address and a simple "see you at 8." No explanation. No hint of what he wanted to talk about. Taking a deep breath, she rang the doorbell. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Ji-hoon, dressed in a simple gray sweater and black sweatpants, far from his usual polished work attire. He looked different, relaxed, yet still carrying that intensity in his eyes. "You came," he said, stepping aside to let her in. Helen walked in cautiously. His apartment was sleek, minimalistic, and spotless, just like she had imagined. Yet it had a warmth to it, an understated elegance that suited him perfectly. "Would you like something to drink?" he asked, heading toward the kitchen. "Water is fine," Helen replied, her voice quieter than usual. Ji-hoon handed her a glass, then leaned against the counter, watching her. The air between them was thick with something unspoken. Finally, Helen broke the silence. "Why did you ask me to come?" Ji-hoon hesitated for just a second. Then he exhaled and said, "Because I needed to see you." Helen's fingers tightened around her glass. "See me?" Ji-hoon pushed himself off the counter and walked toward her, stopping just close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You've been on my mind, Helen." His voice was deep, steady, but there was something raw underneath. "And I don't know how to ignore it anymore." Helen's breath caught. "Ji-hoon." His gaze dropped to her lips for just a fraction of a second before he pulled back, as if catching himself. He let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through his hair. "This is complicated," he muttered. Helen forced a smile.
Tell me about it.
Ji-hoon's lips curved slightly, but his eyes remained serious. "I shouldn't be doing this. You work for me. It's against company policy. But when I saw you with Min-young that night," his jaw tightened, "I realized I can't pretend anymore." Helen's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Ji-hoon exhaled slowly, then reached for her hand. His touch was warm, firm. "I'm saying that if I cross this line, I don't think I'll be able to go back," he admitted. "So tell me now, Helen, do you want me to?" Helen looked into his eyes, and in that moment, she knew. This wasn't just attraction. This was something deeper, and she wanted to dive into it. She squeezed his hand. "Yes." Ji-hoon didn't hesitate. He pulled her closer, his free hand lifting to cup her cheek. And then he kissed her. It was slow at first, as if testing the waters. But the moment Helen melted against him, his restraint snapped. His lips moved against hers with quiet intensity, and she found herself gripping his sweater just to keep steady. When they finally pulled apart, Ji-hoon rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he murmured. Helen nodded, breathless. "I know." And yet, neither of them let go. Helen had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Ji-hoon's touch, the warmth of his lips on hers, the way his breath had mingled with hers in that intimate space. But now, as she stood outside the office building the next morning, reality hit her like a cold gust of wind. She had kissed her boss. Not just her boss, Kang Ji-hoon. The man known for his discipline, his unwavering professionalism. The man who had set clear rules about workplace relationships. And yet, last night, those rules had shattered. Helen took a deep breath, forcing herself to step inside the building. She needed to act normal, professional, as if nothing had happened. As she made her way to her desk, a voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "Hey, Helen." She turned to find Min-young approaching her, his usual grin in place. "You look tired," he said, tilting his head. "Late night." Helen stiffened. Did he know? Could he tell? "Not really," she lied, forcing a smile. "Just had trouble sleeping." Min-young studied her for a second longer than usual, as if sensing something was off. But before he could pry any further, Ji-hoon's office door opened. Helen's breath caught as their eyes met across the room. Ji-hoon didn't hesitate. His gaze lingered on her for just a second, but in that moment, she felt everything. The weight of last night. The silent acknowledgement of what they had done. Then, just as quickly, his professional mask returned. "Helen," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "My office."
Now.
Min-young raised an eyebrow. "What did you do this time?" he teased. Helen forced a chuckle, but inside, she was panicking. She nodded and walked toward Ji-hoon's office, her palms sweating as she stepped inside. The door closed behind her. Ji-hoon turned to her, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk." Helen swallowed hard. "I know." Ji-hoon exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Last night, we crossed a line." Helen nodded slowly, but before she could respond, Ji-hoon continued. "I should be telling you that it was a mistake," he said, his voice lower now, as if fighting against himself. "That we need to forget it ever happened." Helen's heart sank, but she forced herself to ask, "Is that what you want?" Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, then another, closing the space between them. "No," he admitted. "But it's what I should want." Helen's breath hitched. "Ji-hoon." He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. Just a whisper of a touch. But it was enough to send a shiver up her spine. I can't pretend anymore, Helen, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But this is dangerous. If anyone finds out. Helen nodded. She understood. Office romances were complicated, but this was more than that. He was the boss. Still, she couldn't bring herself to regret last night. Ji-hoon exhaled sharply and stepped back, as if putting a physical barrier between them. For now, he said, regaining his composure, we act normal. No one can know. Helen nodded. I understand. But as she left his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that Min-young already suspected something. The day went by in a blur, but Helen felt Min-young's eyes on her more than once. At lunch, he sat across from her, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. So, he said casually, what did Ji-hoon want this morning? Helen tensed. Just work stuff, she replied quickly. Why? Min-young shrugged. No reason. Just he seemed different today. And so do you. Helen forced a laugh. You're imagining things. Am I? Min-young leaned in slightly. You two have been acting strange lately. Anything I should know? Helen swallowed. She needed to change the subject. Min-young, can I ask you something? She said suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. Of course. She hesitated, then asked, have you ever had feelings for someone you weren't supposed to? Min-young's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes. Why do you ask? Helen shrugged, trying to sound nonchalant. Just curious. Min-young smirked, but there was something softer underneath. Once, he admitted. And you know what I realized? Helen tilted her head. What? Sometimes it doesn't matter if it's wrong, he said, holding her gaze. Because once you feel it, you can't take it back. Helen's stomach twisted. He knew. Maybe he didn't have proof, but Min-young knew something was going on between her and Ji-hoon. His jaw clenched. Are you interested in him? Helen's heart skipped a beat. Was he jealous? She let out a breathless laugh. You're unbelievable, she muttered. You were the one who said we had to keep our distance. Ji-hoon's hands came up to her shoulders, his grip firm. Tell me, Helen. Do you want him? She swallowed hard, her pulse racing.
No.
Ji-hoon exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. Then, before she could process what was happening, he pulled her into a slow, heated kiss. Helen melted into him, her hands clutching the fabric of his suit. When they finally pulled apart, Ji-hoon rested his forehead against hers. I don't want to pretend anymore, he murmured. Helen nodded, breathless. But before she could say anything, someone knocked on the door. Director Kong? Min-young's voice came from the other side. Helen's eyes widened in panic. Ji-hoon looked at the door, his expression unreadable. They were about to get caught. Helen had always been good at compartmentalizing. But this was impossible. Every time she saw Ji-hoon in the office, she felt the phantom of his lips against hers, the way his hands had gripped her waist, the heat in his gaze when he said, I can't pretend anymore. And yet, here they were pretending. For the past few days, Ji-hoon had been more distant than usual. He still acknowledged her, still gave her work-related instructions, but there was an invisible wall between them now. A careful avoidance. Maybe he was regretting what happened. Maybe she should too. But every time she convinced herself to move on, Ji-hoon would do something subtle, like letting his fingers brush against hers when handing her a document, or holding her gaze a little too long during meetings. It was maddening. And to make things worse, Min-young had become unusually attentive, as if he was waiting for her to slip. Hey, Min-young said, sliding into the seat beside Helen at the cafeteria. Hey, she greeted, trying not to seem nervous. Min-young studied her for a moment before smirking. You're acting weird. Helen nearly choked on her coffee. I am not. You are. Min-young leaned forward, lowering his voice. And so is Ji-hoon. Helen's stomach dropped. Come on, Helen, he said, voice laced with amusement. You can tell me. Did something happen between you two? Helen forced out a laugh. You're imagining things, Min-young. Min-young raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. If you say so. But as he took a sip of his drink, his knowing smirk didn't fade. And Helen had a sinking feeling. He wasn't going to let this go. Later that evening, Helen was finishing up some last-minute work when Ji-hoon's voice rang out. "Helen, my office." Min-young, who was standing next to her desk, raised an eyebrow. "You're getting called in a lot lately," he teased. "Should I be jealous?" Helen forced a smile and walked toward Ji-hoon's office, her heart pounding. As soon as she stepped inside, Ji-hoon closed the door. "Are you and Min-young close?" he asked, his tone sharp. Helen blinked. "Excuse me? I see how he looks at you," Ji-hoon continued, crossing his arms. "And I see how you act around him." Helen frowned. "Ji-hoon, what are you talking about?" His jaw clenched. "Are you interested in him?" Helen's heart skipped a beat. Was he jealous? She let out a breathless laugh. "You're unbelievable," she muttered. "You were the one who said we had to keep our distance. Now you're acting like—" "Like what?" he interrupted, stepping closer. "Like I can't stand the thought of him having you?" Helen's breath hitched. Ji-hoon's hands came up to her shoulders, his grip firm. "Tell me, Helen, do you want him?" She swallowed hard, her pulse racing.
No.
Ji-hoon exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. Then, before she could process what was happening, he pulled her into a slow, heated kiss. Helen melted into him, her hands clutching the fabric of his suit. When they finally pulled apart, Ji-hoon rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he murmured. Helen nodded, breathless. But before she could say anything, someone knocked on the door. "Director Kong?" Min-young's voice came from the other side. Helen's eyes widened in panic. Ji-hoon looked at the door, his expression unreadable. They were about to get caught. The door handle turned. Helen's pulse skyrocketed. Ji-hoon stepped back instantly, his face snapping into its usual mask of cold authority, but Helen could still feel the ghost of his lips on hers. The door swung open, and Min-young stepped in, his sharp gaze flickering between them. Helen knew immediately he sensed something. Min-young crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Am I interrupting something?" Helen's breath caught, but Ji-hoon, ever composed, barely reacted. "If you were, I wouldn't have let you in." Min-young smirked, but there was something calculating in his expression. His gaze lingered on Helen for just a second too long. "Right," he said slowly. "I was just wondering if Helen wanted to grab dinner. She's been working late a lot." Helen opened her mouth, unsure of what to say. Ji-hoon's fingers twitched at his side. "She has a lot of responsibilities here." Min-young's smirk widened. "Oh, I see. Keeping her busy, huh?" Helen forced a laugh, stepping forward. "Min-young, maybe another time." "Come on," Min-young cut in, his eyes flickering between her and Ji-hoon again. "You do eat, don't you?" Ji-hoon's expression darkened slightly. The tension in the room was thick. Min-young was playing a game, and Helen wasn't sure who would win. After Min-young finally left, Ji-hoon turned to Helen. "Be careful with him," he said quietly. Helen frowned. "Min-young is my friend, Ji-hoon." Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. "He's suspicious. And if he finds out about us?" Helen crossed her arms. "What, Ji-hoon? What happens if he finds out?" Ji-hoon hesitated. "He'll talk. Office gossip spreads fast. And if my father finds out..." Helen swallowed hard. She had heard of Ji-hoon's father, the chairman, a man known for his ruthlessness. Ji-hoon sighed. "I need to handle this carefully. Just keep your distance from Min-young for now." Helen bit her lip. "And what about us?" Ji-hoon hesitated. Then, as if making a decision, he stepped closer. "We take this slow. We're careful." His fingers brushed against hers, barely touching. But God, she felt it everywhere. "Can you do that, Helen?" Helen took a deep breath, knowing this was dangerous. But she also knew her answer. Yes. Min-young sat alone at a bar, swirling his drink. Something wasn't right. Helen had changed. And Ji-hoon, he was different too. Min-young had always known that Ji-hoon wasn't the type to let emotions interfere with work. So, why did it feel like he was guarding Helen? Like he was protecting something? Min-young exhaled. "I need to know the truth." And he had a feeling that if he watched closely enough, he would find it. Min-young had always been observant, but now he was watching. Helen could feel it, his lingering gaze in meetings, the way he seemed to test her responses, the way his usually teasing words carried a sharper edge. And worst of all, Ji-hoon felt it too. Helen was walking down the hallway when Min-young casually appeared beside her. "Lunch?" he asked, smiling. Helen hesitated. Ji-hoon's warning echoed in her mind. I have a lot to do." Min-young stopped walking. "You're avoiding me." Helen swallowed.
What?
"No, Yes, you are," Min-young cut in, his eyes sharp. "And I want to know why." Helen forced a smile. "Min-young, don't be ridiculous." Min-young tilted his head. "Did Ji-hoon tell you to stay away from me?" Helen's stomach dropped. Min-young's smirk widened. "I knew it." Helen forced herself to laugh. "You're being dramatic. I'm just busy." Min-young studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "You know, Helen, if there's something you're hiding, you should tell me before I find out on my own." Helen's breath caught. And then, just like that, Min-young walked away. She let out a shaky exhale. He knew. Or, at least, he was getting too close to the truth. Helen entered Ji-hoon's office later that evening, locking the door behind her. "We have a problem," she said immediately. Ji-hoon, who had been reviewing documents, looked up sharply. "Min-young," she said. "He knows something's off." Ji-hoon's jaw clenched. Helen ran a hand through her hair. "I don't know what to do. He keeps pushing." Ji-hoon stood, walking toward her. "I'll handle it." Helen frowned. "Ji-hoon, you can't just..." He grabbed her waist, pulling her flush against him. Helen's breath caught as his fingers tightened. "Do you trust me?" Ji-hoon asked quietly. Helen swallowed. "Yes, but..." "Then let me handle it." His voice was firm, controlled, but his grip on her hips was anything but. Helen hesitated. "Ji-hoon." His eyes darkened. "I don't like him watching you." Helen's heart pounded. "We work together. He's my friend." Ji-hoon's grip tightened for just a second before he exhaled, loosening his hold. "This is getting dangerous," he muttered. Helen nodded. "I know." Ji-hoon sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll figure something out. Just stay close to me." Helen nodded, but deep down she knew this secret wasn't going to last much longer. Min-young leaned against the wall outside Ji-hoon's office. He had seen Helen enter.
He had seen the door lock.
And he had waited. It wasn't the first time. And every time Helen left Ji-hoon's office, she looked different. Her expression was softer, her lips slightly swollen. Min-young let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "So that's how it is, huh?" He exhaled, shoving his hands in his pockets. Ji-hoon had warned Helen about him. But maybe, just maybe, it was time he warned Ji-hoon. Min-young had never been the type to sit back and watch. If there was one thing he hated, it was being lied to. And Helen had lied. Ji-hoon had lied. Now, it was time to see just how far they were willing to take it. The entire office was abuzz with energy. A major investor was visiting, and everyone was on edge. Helen was reviewing documents in the break room when Min-young walked in, closing the door behind him. "Hey," he said casually. Helen looked up, smiling instinctively. "Hey." Min-young leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Busy?" Helen nodded. "Just making sure everything is in order." Min-young's gaze didn't leave her. "Good. We wouldn't want any secrets messing things up." Helen stiffened. Min-young smirked. "Relax, Helen. I'm just making conversation." Helen forced a chuckle. "You're acting weird today." Min-young stepped closer. "So are you," he said softly. Helen swallowed. "Min-young, what's going on?" He tilted his head. "I know." Helen's breath caught. Min-young smiled. "You and Ji-hoon." Helen felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath her. He knew. He really knew. And from the way he was looking at her, he had known for a while. "Min-young, you don't have to say anything," he cut in. "I just have one question." Helen braced herself. "Does he make you happy?" Helen's lips parted. She hadn't expected that. Min-young's expression was unreadable. "Because if he doesn't, Helen, you deserve better." Helen exhaled. Min-young, it's not that simple. But it is, he interrupted. I care about you. I thought maybe we had something. He let out a quiet laugh. But I was wrong, wasn't I? Helen didn't answer. She couldn't, because any answer she gave would hurt him. Min-young sighed, pushing off the counter. All right, he murmured. I won't interfere. Helen blinked.
What?
Min-young smirked. What? Were you expecting me to run to the director and expose your forbidden office romance? Helen remained silent. Min-young chuckled. I'm not that kind of person, Helen. She exhaled in relief.
But
her stomach dropped. Min-young stepped closer, lowering his voice. If he ever hurts you, he murmured, I won't stand by and watch. Helen shivered. Because for the first time since she met Min-young, he wasn't teasing. He was dead serious. Ji-hoon knew something was off the moment Helen walked into his office that evening. You saw Min-young, he guessed. Helen nodded, sitting down with a sigh. He knows. Ji-hoon's jaw clenched. Did he threaten you? Helen shook her head.
no.
He actually said he wouldn't interfere. Ji-hoon frowned. That didn't sound like Min-young. Helen hesitated. But he did say that if you ever hurt me, he wouldn't let it go. Ji-hoon scoffed. That fool. Helen smiled slightly. He cares about me, Ji-hoon. In his own way. Ji-hoon leaned back, watching her carefully. Are you regretting this? He asked quietly. Helen's eyes widened.
What? No.
Ji-hoon exhaled, rubbing his temples. Good. Helen stood, walking over to him. Hey, she murmured, placing a hand on his shoulder. This isn't easy, but I'm all in, Ji-hoon. We just need to be careful. Ji-hoon looked up at her, his expression softening. I don't want to be careful, he admitted. I want to be with you. Helen's heart skipped. Ji-hoon sighed. But you're right. For now, we have to keep this quiet. Helen nodded. We'll figure it out. Ji-hoon reached for her hand, squeezing it. We will, he murmured. Helen smiled. But deep down she knew. Things were only going to get more complicated.